What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're making some time to talk about players that I haven't really gotten to talk about. Where a lot of these videos, we're talking about first round picks and rookie drafts, we're talking through top 10 wide receivers. But we're going to go a little bit deeper than that. We're going to talk through 5 to 10 players that are going outside of the top 12 to 15 picks in rookie drafts that your league mates are overlooking. And I figured, why not bring on the man, the myth, the legend, Pat Kerrane. He does a bunch of dynasty work. You're drafting these guys late rounds of big board drafts. He's coming on here, squeezing it in. He has a baby on the way. Meanwhile, I'm here watching WrestleMania till midnight last night, playing MLB The Show on the background. Two completely different worlds here, but I do love hearing Pat's perspective. How are you doing today, Pat?
Good. And now you know what an induction is, as I explained before.
It's not the Hall of Fame. I can tell you that.
It's a very different process. Yeah. No, that's true. Going in for induction. My wife's going in tomorrow night. So expecting a baby girl. We're very excited. But, can still talk a little rookies before then. That's not until tomorrow.
Of course. But I was on ship chasing. You had the big announcement. Meanwhile, I was just sitting there in the basement, just like, yeah, this is great, guys. Then Pete kicks it over to me, asks for my big announcement. But for this video, we're going to talk through some late round guys. The first one, I'm going to go first, actually. I know it's usually on cue to let your guest go first, but I'm going to go first here. Buy Pat a little bit of time. We have Jalen McMillan. Jalen McMillan, nice. He's someone that I've been loving as like a late round pick on Underdog. He's going, I think he was like almost undrafted. Now he's like 199. I know we're talking rookie draft and big board, but they're both one in the same. Like once you get to these late rounds, you just want production regardless. And Jalen McMillan is interesting because his stats aren't going to pop off the paper at all. But he was producing in a Washington offense with Jalen Polk, with Rome Odunze, of course. And when you kind of squint, you get some shades of JSN, where they're both these guys who are in the slot a ton. They're both like 6 foot, 195 pounds, 4.5-ish, 4.4, late 4.4 type speed. And I do like Jalen McMillan because he's a slot guy, but he's not your, Wan'Dale Robinson, where he's like, 5'6", like 6-yard ADOT, 12.2 yard ADOT, 66.7% slot percentage isn't bad at all. And when you look at his yards per out run and first down per out run, he was better than Jalen Polk, who is projected to go ahead of him in the NFL draft, which I kind of find surprising. And then also when you sort of squint and you look at what he did next to JSN while he's on the field, his yards per out run metrics are like, they're in that same range. Not super, super far off. I wouldn't say he was going toe-to-toe with Rome Odunze, but he was nothing to sneeze at in this offense. I'm curious, do you like Jalen McMillan? I feel like I've seen him a little bit higher than consensus in your big board rankings. Of course, I should have mentioned it. Legendary Upside. Pat has a great website over there with all of the prospect breakdowns, rankings, all that good stuff. How do the guys over at Legendary Upside feel about Jalen McMillan?
Yeah, I feel definitely intrigued by Jalen McMillan, where if he was going where Polk was going in the big board and stuff, I probably wouldn't be that interested, but he's going at a big discount. He's one of the guys you can mix in towards the very end of drafts. And he's a guy that Dane Brugler called highlighted, I want to say probably 6 weeks ago now, just as like a dude who's like, hey, this is a guy that people seem to have forgotten about, but he was injured and he's an interesting prospect who the NFL has not forgotten about. And so I think if you're looking for guys who are going to get drafted day 2, McMillan probably does. And I think that alone should have him on the radar for you at the end of these best ball drafts. And then, he's got decent size. He's 197, he's 6'1". So he's not like a super tiny slot receiver, as you mentioned. And he can kind of operate a little bit further downfield. One thing I am a little bit worried about him is that he had 13% of his career yards were on behind the line of scrimmage targets. 43% of his career yak came behind the line of scrimmage. He did add a little bit on deep targets. 33% of his career yards came on 20-plus yard targets, which is a pretty decent mark. So, but it was like very like kind of scheme stuff and then deep stuff. And that makes me a little bit nervous about him as kind of like a gadgety type guy. But he's generally seen as a slot. And if he basically the bet is he goes like let's say late round 2, early round 3, lands in a good situation and is a starting slot receiver, for what you're paying, that's a pretty big win. And I think it's pretty likely.
Yeah, and I'll say like a little bit of a red flag too. He's not a contested catch guy, but 20% career contested catch percentage is like by far the worst in this class. So it's not all that important for slot receivers, but in terms of him, maybe expanding his role to like outside, he's a little bit limited in that perspective. I will say if you find the late round guy and you don't really like him as well, you can definitely poke holes if you want, Pat. I'm curious though, who's the late round guy that you've had your eye on? Whether that, for dynasty purposes, late round in the big board, who do you want to sort of throw on the table here?
I'll start with my highest drafted wide receiver, who's Jermaine Burton. And this is a profile that is not spotless. If you want to poke holes in Jermaine Burton's profile, you can pretty easily, but he brings something to the table that I think will translate. He's a downfield, he's a deep threat. He's going to play outside. He doesn't have like a high targets per route run because he doesn't get a ton of targets, but the targets he gets are deep downfield. He produces on those, really good in terms of actually catching the ball, very few drops, really big hands. I think he's going to be reliable in that way, consistently being able to get down the field. The problem is, and I didn't realize this to the extent that, this may be a problem as I was drafting him a couple of months ago, but listened to the Athletic Football Show, and Dane Brugler noted that one NFL scout told him that he was kind of in the doghouse with the coaches at Georgia and Alabama. Started his career at Georgia, played 2 years there, goes to Alabama, breaks out last season with a 35% dominator rating, 30% yardage share, 40% touchdown share, 798 yards on only 39 receptions. That's 20.5 yards per reception. Really high ADOT. His ADOT was above 20 as well. But you don't love that two different coaching staffs have kind of concerns about who this dude is. So I think it's a very boom bust type of pick, but we're talking literally like 20th round. He's moved up. Maybe you have to take him in like the 19th round now, but the very last rounds of these 20-round drafts, you're able to get this guy who had a breakout season at Alabama, was more productive in his second season than Ladd McConkey and A.D. Mitchell, who is sharing the offense with. He was the most productive of the three. Now, none of them was super productive. He had a 16% dominator rating that season, but these are potentially 2 first-round wide receivers, and Burton was actually the guy who was producing the most. Then he has a breakout season at Alabama 2 years later. I do think he probably gets drafted day 2. If he does, I view it as a huge win because someone is saying we can work with this guy. If he falls to day 3, then I think that tells you a lot about kind of where those reports kind of came in from his coaches. And that's the risk you're taking when you're drafting him right now, is that this dude might just, not be, he's not so good that NFL teams are going to put up with, character issues or whatever the concerns were. So you do have to kind of factor that into a degree, but I think you're getting a discount on the talent level that I have a hard time passing on.
Yeah, I like that call as well, where if you do want to bet on one of these guys that like kind of has a weird profile, transferred like off the field, whatever, why not bet on like the 4-star recruit who went to Georgia and Alabama? You can kind of explain away some of the production concerns. Really the only thing I have an issue with is just the ADOT is so far downfield. I guess you're just hoping for like spike weeks, but I guess it does limit your ceiling a little bit long term in terms of just being like a, focal point of an offense. But you can definitely talk yourself. Like he almost kind of reminds me of like, I don't know, like a cheaper Jamison Williams or like a Will Fuller, where they're downfield. He tested well. I think if you want to go like the lowest of low end of those comps, like kind of like Donovan Peoples-Jones, like highly touted recruit, would have liked him to do better in college, right? But you can definitely see what's going on there. I know like film guys absolutely love him. Yeah, Darius Slayton would be another one as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's what you're getting. Like, I'm not trying, and for Dynasty, I would say probably a little less appealing than just the last round best ball dart throw because, Slayton people were excited about him after his rookie season. So,
yep.
What I would say is don't put this guy in pen on your dynasty roster for 3 years. Like, you're seeing what he is. If he hits, maybe he's the type of guy who you can throw into a trade and kind of use as kind of a value add piece that way. But I mean, he is very much the deep threat. He had, I mentioned McMillan had 33% of his yards on deep targets last year, which is a decently high percentage. Burton was at 51%. And then he had 33% on top of that coming on intermediate targets, 10 to 19 yards downfield. So we're looking at 84%. 84% of this guy's career yards came at least 10 yards on targets, 10 yards downfield, with the majority of his career yards coming on 20-plus yard targets. It's like coaches aren't going to have to think too hard about like what Jermaine Burton's adding to their offense. He's going to play outside and he's going to run really far downfield. Like even if he's like the worst case, right, would be like he's Jalen Guyton. But like if he lands on a good enough, if he's with Herbert, if he's the new Jalen Guyton, I think I'm still kind of okay with that in the 20th round. So I think there's like, it's sort of you're playing for a single. You're not playing for a home run here, but it's so cheap that single probably you're pretty happy about it if you get it.
I like the shout of Tyrell Williams on the Chargers. It's kind of a similar build.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
But so this next guy I wanted to talk about, our third kind of gem here. He's somebody who had, very predictably so, coming out of high school. I remember him being like huge. He was a guy who was on like TikTok coming out. It's like the next Christian McCaffrey, Will Shipley, of like a white running back who catches passes, athletic. And I don't like, here's the thing with him. He's so tough to me because when you look at the descriptive metrics, right? When you look at missed tackles forced per attempt and yards after contact and elusiveness rating, he's pretty awful in all of those things, like bottom percentile. I haven't done as much research as others, but I heard Hayden Winks kind of talk about it. They had a very outside zone heavy scheme, which doesn't really lend itself to breaking tackles. And, you're just trying to like get the angle out there. He compared it to like Trey Benson and stuff who had like much less outside zone and, contributing to missed tackles forced. But when you just kind of like look back and we're talking about, a pretty awful running back class, he's someone who at his pro day, so if you want to adjust the numbers, fine, but 5'11", 206 pounds, 4.4 speed, 38-inch vertical, elite agility scores. I mean, 21-year-old early declare, out of a Power 5 school in Clemson, 38 catches in his second year. He also had 15 touchdowns in his second year. So he's like this 3-down back. He's used on the goal line. He catches passes, has the pedigree, tested well. It's tough in a class like this to not have him inside of like my top 10 running backs. And to be honest, if he goes like day 2, I think my model would have him as like the RB1 in this class, which I don't know if that says more about Will Shipley or the strength of this class, but in terms of what we're looking for, of size,
it's the strength of this class.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. But yeah, I don't mind Will Shipley. I'm curious because I know he's in this range where nobody really likes any of these running backs until we get draft capital or a landing spot. Is Will Shipley is he appealing at all to Pat Kerrane?
Not really. Although on Ship Chasing, Sean Siegel was saying that he views him as one of the guys who could really hit. And so that definitely made me kind of go, maybe I'm missing something, because he is so athletic and he's versatile. So you're getting that. I mean, that's a nice profile generally. He ran a ton of routes. He ran 17 routes per game. He handled a decent amount of the backfield, 69% backfield dominator rating in his final season, 56% of his career, which is pretty decent. So that versatility plus athleticism definitely is nice. He's big enough. He's 206. So, he can kind of be out there like in a Devin Singletary sort of way, where he's just kind of doing all the stuff. So I think that's kind of your bull case. The concerns that I have, 32% breakaway percentage is very poor. That's a 13th percentile breakaway percentage. He was also 35th percentile in breakaway yards per game, which generally, like, I like looking at the per game stuff for this, because we want guys who are out there handling a lot of touches. And, if on those touches they occasionally rip off big runs, that's actually pretty sweet, even if it's not constantly happening. But he wasn't that great there either, only 35th percentile there. So we didn't see that athleticism really translate in a huge way to actually just producing long plays, which are obviously hugely important for fantasy. Then, as I mentioned, he's out there all the time running routes, but only 0.95 yards per route run, which isn't like a huge deal. Like I think Breece Hall was at like 0.98 or something. Like this isn't like, oh, he can't catch passes, but it is concerning if the path is supposed to be him catching passes. Like Dylan Laube, who I'll be talking about later, he's at 1.81, and that's like, okay, you can get on the field as a pass catcher potentially. Like this is a way for you to show coaches this is a way to use you. He strikes me more, again, Shipley, kind of more in that Devin Singletary mold, where if he's asked to do it, he could probably do it. But I don't know, is he going to get asked to do it? Like he seems like he's going day 3 now. With your point about him having draft capital, as a 3rd round pick, I'm way more interested than I am as like a 4th or 5th round pick, because he has the profile where, I mean, kind of like maybe a Kyron Williams, where it's like just give this guy all the work and it could be pretty cool. But with these kind of like day 3 guys, no one gives them the work. They have to take the work. His profile it makes me a little nervous if I'm betting on a guy to take someone else's job.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. He's probably more so, like you said, like day 2, that would at least give us some signal that he could just, on talent alone with the opportunity to draft capital. But day 3, he probably needs some kind of injury that sort of just like thrusts him into a 3-down role on like probably a shitty team, to be honest. But I'm what we're talking about receiving running backs, so I got another one as well. But I do want to hear your take on Dylan. You were saying Dylan Laube. I suck at pronouncing the names. Dylan Laube, I think out of New Hampshire or no?
Yeah, New Hampshire. That's right.
Yeah, out of New Hampshire. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I like him a lot. Blair Andrews has done some really awesome work over the years at RotoViz on backfield dominator rating as one of the key metrics that can help us identify day 3 running backs or kind of even later day 2 running backs. Guys the NFL is overlooking. Devin Achane actually popped in this metric last year. Was also huge in identifying guys like Phillip Lindsay. And the idea here is we want running backs who operate as like an entire college backfield. It shows versatility and it shows trust. We've got the coaches leaning on these guys in basically every situation in some of these cases. I mean, it's, some guys in college are like 95, 98% of a college offense. And that's what, almost Dylan Laube was last year. He had 94% of the New Hampshire backfield, 94% backfield dominator rating, and he was at 86% for his career. So year in, year out, this guy is just, you throw him out there and you let him be the entire backfield. And he's doing that as a efficient receiver, which I think is so important for his jump to the NFL. He led the entire class in yards per route run with 1.81. Admittedly, he wouldn't have led most classes with that mark. Normally we have someone like Jahmyr Gibbs who's over 2. This is like kind of more like James Cookian than like amazing kind of Jahmyr Gibbs. Oh my God, this guy could be a Kamara level superstar receiver. But he looks like the type of guy who could still be good enough as a receiver that he actually gets on the field to do that specifically. He ran 24 routes per game, which is the most in the class as well. So that receiving side of the profile is really what gets my attention. But he's also pretty athletic, 8.75 RAS. That's driven off a pretty mediocre 40, but elite agility. And if we're putting the story together of who Laube is and who's going to be in the NFL, elite agility is what I want. I take that over, a faster 40. Give me a elite agility in a 4.5 40 over mediocre agility and a 4.4 40, because his whole thing is that he's going to be able to be agile and kind of a difference maker, hopefully, in the passing game. So that kind of reinforces that part of the profile. And then he's also 206. So he's not tiny. That's what Shipley weighs. So as I was just saying, I think Shipley could kind of be that Devin Singletary guy. I think Laube could too. It's going to take a lot longer and a lot more things to go right for an offense to actually hand him that role. But at the very least, they're not going to be like pulling him off the field every time they're going to run the ball. Like he's not going to be only out there on receiving downs. It can be a little bit like a Chase Edmonds where, yeah, he comes on as a receiver, but maybe he gets a little bit, they get that first down. He doesn't leave the field. He could be kind of like Rex Burkhead, where he's adding a little bit as a rusher, even though he's primarily a receiver, or Danny Woodhead, who he gets comped to all the time because they're both white. So, but Mike Davis is another guy that I would compare him to. Is like, he's never going to be the type of rusher that we're super excited about. But if he ends up in a situation where he's getting used a lot as a receiver and is not leaving the field as a rusher, that's kind of what Rachaad White really is, frankly. And, in the right situation, that can pay off pretty big.
Yeah, and it's funny you say Rachaad White because he pops up here too. I have just receiving points per game in college. Laube is at the top, 12.25 receiving points per game. Next best is Antonio Gibson, 9.86, Gibbs, 8.79, Mixon, 8.3, and then Rachaad White, 8.2. Pretty insane in terms of his production in the passing game. I think as well, like he had a career, 1,654 receiving yards. That is the most in my database as well. He's really fun. The only holdup on him, but it's tough because it's kind of the holdup with all of these guys is that he's old as hell. Like he's 24.
Yeah.
So, there's not gonna be a lot of value gain in Dynasty, but like I said it earlier, but when you're drafting these guys late, like, I don't know, maybe you're hoping for Kyron Williams where they like shoot up in startups, but if I can draft a Dylan Laube and he gives me production where I can just throw him in the lineup, like that's massive, value over replacement you're getting from a 3rd round rookie pick. And someone else that kind of fits that mold for me is I've been liking Tyrone Tracy Jr. He's the wide receiver convert out of Purdue. He's fun. Now, I will say he's also old as hell. He's 24 years old. November 23rd, 1999 was his birthday. And he kind of looks like one of these guys like an Antonio Gibson, Ty Montgomery. He's not quite the size speed specimen that is Antonio Gibson, but 209 pounds, 4.4 speed, 40-inch vertical, elite agility drill as well. And then he's also, in terms of like the per touch stuff, is a monster where, now I will say, he didn't start taking handoffs like his final year. So, these are career numbers that,
right.
is like his best versus, Will Shipley, kind of sucking as like a freshman or whatever. And he was out of 29 running backs in this class, 6 in missed tackles forced per touch, 2nd in yards to contact per attempt, 1st in explosive run rate, 5th in elusiveness rating, 6th in receiving fantasy points per snap. I'm in at that point. Also, Lance Zierlein likes him a ton, who has like really good running back grades over these past few years. I'm trying to see where exactly he has him, but I think he might have him as like a top 5 running back. Yeah, he has, RB5 tied with Marshawn Lloyd. Wow. It's Brooks, Wright, Benson, and then Lloyd and Tracy tied for RB5. So he's been fun. I will say, I don't even think that he's in the big board player pool. I could be wrong. But he is really fun. If he gets, somewhere, I don't know, like the Chiefs would be cool, Dallas would be cool, one of these landing spots. But I think that's kind of the thing to take home from this running back class is like they all kind of are yucky, but we do have some guys who can certainly pop in the receiving game, which is really all we're looking for in fantasy.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Chiefs because I think kind of Jerick McKinnon is what you're hoping he is.
Yeah,
that super athletic convert to the running back position. And yeah, you're probably, I would say in a lot of these, from a dynasty perspective, the way I view a lot of the running backs in this class is we're playing for, and I don't mean this in an archetype, I mean this in kind of a value and what you're getting out of them on your roster, but we're playing for Brian Robinsons here. We're trying to get guys that we are like Brian Robinson, like no one cares he broke out last year. Like it's no one cares. You better use those points, man. No one's trading for the points. You got to use them. But I think if that's, if you can use the points of a Tyrone Tracy, Will Shipley, Ray Davis, Dylan Laube, these guys kind of coming in and just like chugging along and doing some semi-interesting stuff. And like, a Brian Robinson type of like middling production outcome is actually kind of sweet. Like these guys, there are lots of guys I think in this class that are kind of at that level. And yeah, I think he's one of those guys. He's definitely a really kind of interesting eval from the, from the statistical point of view, because all of his per game stuff is horrendous because he didn't play the position, and all of his per touch stuff is too good that you can't trust it. But what I feel best about is that he is going to add in the receiving game. And his efficiency wasn't crazy good, 1.27 yards per out run, but that's good enough. And we know the context of, this guy can play receiver. So that part of it makes me pretty intrigued. Also, what I would note, we saw last year with Michael Wilson, who wasn't in the underdog player pool. When we went to the summer, Michael Wilson was still undervalued because people just weren't used to taking him. So I think especially early on in drafts, he could end up with a pretty intriguing day 3 landing spot. He just won't be on the radar. So I think a really good name for people to be aware of.
Yeah. And I think honestly, again, this running back class isn't anything sexy, but if we look back and there's I think that we'll see a couple running backs with real staying power where it's the JD McKissicks and the Theo Riddicks of the world of guys who just stay on rosters and, churn out fantasy points. And maybe I'm trying to think, it was JD McKissick that one year. I think Chris Thompson as well, when he was on Washington, where you look up and they turn in an RB 20 point per game year in a down year for running backs or just a random year where a starter got hurt. But I will say, I know you have some names in mind, but I do want to talk to you about Bo Nix. I know we're both big fans. He's someone who's slipping down rookie ADP, sort of understandably so, where he was kind of in the mix for 12th to the Broncos, and now seems more likely he's probably day 2. I will say in my most recent mock, I had them trading back with the Eagles and taking Bo Nix at the 22nd pick. I could see the Broncos coming back up into the first and kind of pulling I think what the Ravens did with Lamar Jackson. We've seen that move before. But how are you feeling about Bo Nix? I guess in Dynasty, I imagine in best ball, we're not all that interested at this point. But he's super old. But why do you kind of like Bo Nixon or Bo Nix?
Yeah, I think definitely a Dynasty play more than a best ball play right now, because what do you win when you win? You kind of take all this risk that he might not even start, and you get pretty mediocre kind of fantasy profile out of Bo Nix. But he strikes me as the kind of guy that could be a starter, and I think could fit in pretty well in, a Broncos type of scheme. I think frankly, he would be pretty good right away in the Vikings type of scheme. And I'm not suggesting that's what they're attempting to do. They're pretty clearly trying to get May or McCarthy, I think, or Daniels, but we'll see. But he throws to the middle of the field well. He avoids mistakes really, really well. He had a super low pressure to sack rate. Zach Kruger's done some good work over at NBC recently, highlighting how important pressure to sack rate is. And it's something I think has been kind of underrated for a couple years now as a way for us to, understand guys that aren't processing the field all that well, letting, hanging in there too long, like we saw with Sam Howell last year, just hanging in, then get sacked. Letting that first read develop for way too long. That's on kind of the low end, but on the high end, it's not a bad thing if these guys are getting the ball out consistently and avoiding mistakes. And he's almost Mahomesian in his ability to constantly avoid mistakes. Now, his highlights are the least Mahomesian thing on the planet. So you don't get, you don't get both sides of the coin, but you do get at least that consistency where he's just avoiding mistakes really well. And throwing to the middle of the field, especially the deep middle of the field, is a really important part of the modern NFL game and an important part of him. If we're going to get excited because he lands with a good offensive coordinator, that's what he's going to be asked to do. If he lands in one of these Shanahan style schemes, or even with Sean Payton, we see over in Detroit, that's a Payton tree offense. They're attacking the middle of the field relentlessly there. Drew Brees in some of his biggest seasons was attacking the middle of the field relentlessly. So Nix's splash zone PFF grade ranks just behind Trevor Lawrence and ahead of Jared Goff. So he's not a highlight reel passer, but he is looking like a fairly capable point guard who can get big plays out of his receivers by getting them the ball in space. Then they make the big play after that. Not a big arm downfield, exciting quarterback in that sense. But hey, we're going to get him in the second round. And he could be an instant starter. He's live to still go in the first, as you're mentioning. So you're talking about a first-round quarterback who's going to start in the second round. That's not something we typically have access to. Even Mac Jones was a late first. So, I just think from the value of the pick, he's kind of a no-brainer target in that early second round when the profiles at wide receiver start to get a little bit boom bust. And as we talked about, the running back class is not very strong.
Yeah, like once you get like for me, I've had such a hard time sort of trying to be with market on Bo Nix and Dynasty because after Ladd McConkey, like I like the wide receivers, but there's like this big jumble from like we talked about Jalen McMillan at the top all the way through whoever you want. Like you can talk all the way through like Devontez Walker, Ricky Pearsall. Like there's like 10 wide receivers that you can kind of talk yourself into in the middle of the second. Whereas those guys are all, I mean, they're great, whatever. But like Bo Nix, if he just gets on the field, like I'm trying to look it up now. Sam Howell, right? Like he's pretty brutal now. I will say I have some Sam Howell in Dynasty that I wish I moved quicker. But Sam Howell is currently so this is what not to do. You don't hold him at this point. But like what Bo Nix's ceiling is in year one, he starts some games, he looks decent. And Sam Howell right now is the QB 34 in Dynasty. He peaked at QB 13. If you can, I mean, QB 13 in Dynasty, you sell that and you're getting, like first round draft capital. So like that's kind of the upside of Bo Nix just in terms of value gain. I will say too, I know everyone likes to say, I know even you say, he could be the point guard, he can manage everything. And I think that that's definitely his archetype. But if you squint, I think he can give you a little bit more than that. He was someone that came in as a 4-star recruit. He has some highlights. He is somebody where this Oregon offense was very weird. I think that he had the lowest ADOT in the entire, I don't know, Power 5, at least Pac-12. I think it was under 7-yard ADOT. I do wonder. I know it's obviously not the same system that Justin Herbert was in, but a lot of people said with Herbert is he was such a tough QB evaluation. If you watch Brett Coleman and JT O'Sullivan, the QB school, he was so tough because they didn't really ask him to put his arm on display and do all of that. So I do wonder if there's more underneath the surface, but that's really wishful thinking, I'd say, for Bo Nix. Now, I did want to kick it back to you.
Just a couple of more things. He also ran for a bunch of touchdowns. So you want to talk about underrated upside, 0.62 rushing touchdowns per game. That was more than Jaden Daniels. That was ahead of guys like Justin Fields, Anthony Richardson, Josh Allen. So he's not a zero as a rusher around the goal line, which is pretty fun. I think that's an important thing to know. And then just on the value part of this, it may not seem plausible to you, the listener, that Bo Nix is going to gain value, but Drew Lock was quarterback 21 heading into his second season, in Dynasty, because he was a starter. He was a second-round pick, and then he was named the starter, and he didn't finish the season as the starter, but he got a shot, and we're like, all right, young quarterback getting a shot. Deshaun Kaiser was quarterback 25.5 in his rookie season because he got a shot. If Bo Nix gets a shot, he will have value. And I think he gets a shot. I think he's good enough to get a shot.
I think he gets a shot as well. And I think the interesting part is, like you said, he doesn't screw up. So it's not going to be, he's not going to fumble all over himself. It's not going to be the most masterclass performance of all time. But like you said, with the not making bad plays, he had just a minus 2.3 EPA lost on sacks, which is absurd this year. Jaden Daniels had minus 14.6. We both love Drake May. He had minus 17.3. So, he doesn't screw up. He doesn't take bad sacks. He should be able to start some games, gain some value in Dynasty, which is always, what we're looking for. Anytime you get a quarterback in the second round who looks like Bo Nix, why not make that bet? Now, I did kind of force Bo Nix into the conversation here. So I did want to know if you have another late round guy that you've been drafting a good bit of.
Yeah, I actually have been taking a fair amount of Tez Walker, who I think is interesting. And in a similar way, I would say he's sort of in the Jermaine Burton sort of archetype where you know what you're getting. He is a downfield, outside, deep threat. As I mentioned, 51% of Burton's career yards came on 20-plus yard targets. Devontez Walker was at 48%. So very similar, very kind of clearly in that archetype. The interesting thing about him, too, is that only 26% of those deep targets were contested. That's a pretty low rate and generally indicates that he can separate deep. The problem with Devontez Walker, did not add much after the catch, only had a 21% contested catch rate, which is really bad. So if he hasn't separated, he's not catching it. After he catches the ball, the play is over. We can all head back. He catches the ball and throws it to the referee. That's the end of the play.
He does the Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, exactly. So the Tyler Lockett, there's not a ton of downfield yak here. That's not ideal, but he has this interesting profile where he started his career actually at an FCS school, but that was a COVID season, so he didn't play at all. And then he transferred in 2021 to Kent State, was fine there that year, and then in 2022 he broke out with a 50% dominator rating. He had 921 yards. He had a 65% touchdown share, 11 touchdowns to get there, but a 36% yardage share, which is pretty good. So this was a legitimate, third-year breakout. It was at Kent State, not like the biggest level of competition, but, he then goes and transfers to UNC to play with Drake May. The NCAA says, you've transferred twice, doesn't let him play. He's not eligible. So he spends the first 4 games not even thinking he's going to be able to play for the team that year. So he isn't practicing with the first team and everything, because he's basically not in the plans. So then 4 games later, the NFL reverses this really dumb decision, and he's able to play. He's able to get out there. He plays 8 games. He has a 32% dominator rating. He's pretty efficient, 2.32 yards per team attempt, a 35% touchdown share, 28% yardage share. I have heard some concerns that people have about his route running and everything, especially from that UNC year. But he was just kind of thrown out there, and it's make it work, and he did make it work. So I actually want my thing with Devontez Walker is he's one of these college profiles where I'm wondering if there's more to it than we ever really got to see. Because what does he look like in a world where he's just practicing with the UNC first team and they're installing him as their number 1 wide receiver for the very first game of the season, as opposed to him coming and joining the team mid-season? I think in that world, he could have been very efficient, because he already was pretty efficient. 2.28 yards per route run in that final season, 2.62 yards per route run in his third season. There are a bunch of guys in this class who had pretty interesting senior seasons. He's one of the guys who had an interesting senior season and did some stuff in his first 3 seasons that really kind of makes you take notice as well. So I'm a little concerned about his draft capital. I think he could fall to day 3. That obviously hurts, but I'm taking the chance that he's a 3rd-round pick, lands in a decent spot, and kind of provides that explosive deep threat element.
I was actually going to say, it wouldn't shock me at all if he went higher than we would think. He's somebody where I remember early in the draft cycle where he was almost a consensus top 5 guy or a top 7 guy. He's fallen back since then, but I think that's kind of just how the draft cycle goes. It wouldn't shock me with this class, because you have, I don't know, like we said earlier, you have 10 receivers that are fighting for day 2 draft capital. I don't hate the idea of just kind of getting the cheaper ones, and because you're going to get, remember, I don't know, did we think Alec Pierce would be a 2nd-round pick, or right. There's Andy Isabella, McCole Hardman. Sometimes, the NFL is just
Rashee Rice, Jaden Reed.
Yep. So it wouldn't shock me if Devontez Walker was one of those guys. He had a ton of buzz early on. It's a little bit of a boomer take, but a lot of teams are going to have the Drake May tape on anyways, and they'll see him there.
I love it.
I don't hate the idea that he could outperform his draft capital. He is interesting again as one of these deep threat guys. Someone else that I will throw out there as a sleeper that I've liked, who's kind of similar, where a weird early part in his career, perimeter wide receiver, but I like him a little bit more as as someone that could maybe develop into a true X. I like Michael Gallup as the comp for Javon Baker out of
I like Baker.
UCF. He's fun, where he was a 4-star recruit for Alabama. His freshman year was a Devontae Smith Heisman campaign. His sophomore year had Jamison Williams and John Mechie both go for 1,000+ yards. He transfers to UCF. Fine first year there, where he had about 2 yards per out run, and then just murdered his final year, 3.21 yards per out run, over 20 yards per reception. And he does, he just looks like the prototypical X receiver, where he is 6'1", 202 pounds, 4.5 speed, 37-inch vertical. And of the 39 wide receivers in my database, he looks good. He's 8th in yards per out run, 10th in first downs per out run. His year 4 yards per team pass attempt, when you just look at the other seniors, so of course, like your Marvin Harrisons and Malik Neighbors won't be there, but he's third in this class behind just 2 small school guys, or 1 small school guy, and Jalen Coker, Jamari Thrash. He's actually ahead of what Odunze had last year. 14.7 career yard ADOT, which to me signals a little bit that maybe he can kind of be featured, everywhere, not just all downfield. He was used a little bit in the slot, 19.2% slot percentage on his career, 5.6 yards after catch, which is also all right. He also had the 4th best contested catch percentage in this class, 56% in his career. And then he's also not your Quentin Johnston, where he had under 20% of his targets being contested. So he gets open, he can do the jump ball stuff. Just 22 years old, good pedigree. So Javon Baker is someone that I'm definitely coming around on more. I think that he's probably going to go day 2.
I really like Baker. I like the Michael Gallup comp a lot. I think that kind of sort of perfectly sums up like sort of the archetype of player that we're looking to get here. Very much a downfield threat. Some of the guys that came up as statistical comps for me were Traquan Smith, De'Ami Brown, Carlos Henderson, and Rashee Rice. One of the things that jumps out to me about him, you talk about his ability to win jump ball situations and also separate that on the deep targets. I mean, 30% contested target rate, that's not high, and 81% contested catch rate, that's very high. So, he can kind of do it both. He can get open and he can win in the jump ball situations. I mean, that's what you look at, like Marvin Harrison. That's what he has. That's what you want. He's got 42% of his career yards on 20-plus yard targets, 37% of his career yards on intermediate 10 to 19-yard targets. So very much the downfield target earner, and that's where you're going to get all of his production. He also had 61% of his career yards after catch downfield on 10-plus yard targets. That's something I look at. Sometimes you see, this is actually something I mentioned with Laube McConkey. Laube McConkey can get open deep. He can also add after the catch. But a lot of his yards after catch came on behind the line of scrimmage targets. So it wasn't always the case that he was catching the ball downfield and then adding after. We see with like a guy like Brandon Ayuk that is extremely powerful when you're a yak producer on downfield targets. And Javon Baker actually showed an ability to do that. So he's been kind of under the radar. I was taking a lot of Burton over him, and then I've kind of been flipping to make sure I'm getting more Baker. Another guy that you can just consistently hammer in like round 19, 20 is the last guy you're taking these drafts. And yeah, I think he could go day 2. This class has so many guys that are kind of in the day 2 mix that someone is going to be forgotten about with like legit draft capital. And he probably would be like the number 1 guy that people just are like, I just didn't have time to dig into Javon Baker. I'll get to that later. And it's like, well, you probably should have, because he has legit like NFL. He fits an NFL offense as a downfield receiver, which is, one of the ways we can see these guys hit the ground running right away as rookies.
Yeah, it's going to sting. We're going to see somebody not go day 2, whether it's like, Xavier Legette, Malachi Corley. There's a bunch of names, and it's going to be a game of musical chairs. I am curious, do you have another receiver to talk about? I think I have like one more player. You have another receiver that you're hoping for day 2 draft capital with? Or any player, really. I don't care.
Yeah, I would say, let's see. Well, I know I'm getting day 2 draft capital with Ricky Pearsall, but I do just want to shout him out. As someone I feel like I needed to get up in my rankings. And, I did that a couple of days ago. I was ahead of him the whole way, but he's climbed a lot in the big. And he was one of these guys you could take in the 20th round early on. And now he's kind of more in like the 150-ish range. But I recently put him just one spot behind Roman Wilson. Came away really feeling like these are pretty similar types of guys. JJ Zacharyson, I believe, was comping Pearsall to Jaden Reed in his rookie draft guide. And it's a similar type of, 5th-year guy, probably playing out of the slot, but he's shown an ability to also win downfield. He's not just on behind the line of scrimmage targets. Interesting profile in that a lot of his yak did come on behind the line of scrimmage targets, but then he has a whole second bucket of yak that's coming on downfield plays. So he's sort of like one of these guys, like if you want him to be a gadget player, he can be. but he also had 45% of his career yak on 10-plus yard targets and 46% of his career yards on intermediate targets. So I think he's one of these dudes who's going to be kind of consistently the bull case is he consistently gets open in the intermediate part of the field, and he's adding to the catch after that. If he lands in, one of these Shanahan-style systems, I think he could be really interesting as a high targets per route run PPR kind of guy.
I'm glad you brought him up because I almost wanted to bring him up myself, but I couldn't bring myself to do it as like we're both numbers leaning guys, and I think it's tough to make the case for Ricky. I mean, you just did with the way that he creates yak all around the all around the field. For me, it's a little bit tougher to kind of like look at the numbers. He's 23 years old, like under 2 career yards per out run, but I'm hearing everybody. I know Hayden Winks absolutely loves him, and he's someone that I'm just like. It's almost like a ball kind of test where it's like Ricky Pearsall. I think you kind of had to throw the numbers out. I will say as well with the after the catch stuff, I'm a sucker for dynamic wide receivers. He had 21 rush attempts, 253 rushing yards, and 5 rushing touchdowns in college, which is pretty crazy for a guy like Ricky Pearsall that looks the way he does. He tests really well. And I will say as well, he came out in reception perception today, 87 percentile versus man, which is great. And I think, this was the guy, of course, check out Matt Harmon, reception perception. He said, like, leading into this, like, profile dropping, he was like, this is my favorite guy I've had to chart this year. And that's Ricky Pearsall. Just in terms of, like, his deployment and, like, how fun he is, people really, really like Ricky Pearsall. And again, it's almost moved me to be like, this is kind of a sleeper I like, even though I don't really have much of a claim for it. But I also did want to ask, because it seems like he was one of your guys early on. I did want to ask you about Roman Wilson and where we're at there. Because I've been in on Roman Wilson, but in that update today, which again, show Matt Harmon all the love in the world. His reception perception is amazing. Roman Wilson, 19th percentile versus man, 11th percentile versus zone, 15th percentile versus press. Not great for a guy that I've liked and have been drafting. And I know that the numbers look good for Roman Wilson. So not to kind of set you up to fail here, but where are we at on Roman Wilson? Because he's kind of been bouncing around for me personally this offseason. Because you have some guys saying like, oh, well, is he just like, because one of his big traits is that he's a blocker. Well, it's like, well, how's that really going to give us fantasy points? His per route stuff is good, but he wasn't used a ton. I'm curious, how are you kind of weighing all of that with Roman Wilson?
Yeah, and I'd kind of gotten the sense that Matt Harmon wasn't very high on Roman Wilson, and that was making me a little nervous, but I still and then going back to the profile, though, like I still like the statistical profile on Roman Wilson a fair amount. And I guess what I would say with Wilson and Pearsall is that I think I could view them very similarly now, especially after moving Pearsall up. But I think generally this class offers us the potential to take profiles that we don't normally take because they're going to be pretty cheap. Like I have these guys as kind of second round or even late second round type of rookie picks, but there's lots of guys to take in this draft. And some of them, right, will get priced out on some of these guys because they'll land in great situations and then everyone will get super excited. But there's just a lot of people. So some of them are going to be pretty big values in the late second round. And Pearsall strikes me that way where, the profile is not perfect, but there's enough to get excited about at a fairly cheap price. And Roman Wilson's kind of similar in that way where another guy who's a downfield producer, 39% of his career yardage on 20-plus yard targets, 33% on 10-plus yard targets. Probably a guy who's playing out of the slot. In the pros, he was playing out of the slot a lot at Michigan. There's a little bit of a concern there I have where, like, okay, he's kind of like winning deep from the slot. That's kind of the Jalen Hyatt red flag where, like, that's not really a thing very much in the NFL. But he was really good in the intermediate area too. 33% of his yards there. His yak was tilted to downfield targets. He only had 16% of his deep targets contested. That's super low, 57% contested catch rate. He's not the biggest guy, but he is actually really athletic. Ran a sub 4.40. So, I think I've never wanted to pay like a ton for Roman Wilson, but as a pick in the 150s where he's looked somewhat live for round one draft capital, maybe that seems to be cooling off. I think I probably peaked around the Senior Bowl where he had a really strong Senior Bowl. built, by the way, on route running. I mean, people were talking about how this guy was like uncoverable at the Senior Bowl. So I guess what I would say too is I don't think the story's over yet on, can this guy win at the NFL level as a route runner? And, I definitely am discouraged to hear that he had the low percentiles, but I still think he has a chance there. And, even though the first round draft capital seems to have cooled off, good chance of going round 2. Like, he seems fairly safe for round 2. At the very worst, we're talking round 3. So he's going to have solid draft capital to get that, around pick 150 in best ball is pretty nice, especially with some of the landing spots available. And then, in Dynasty, kind of a second round type of guy for me still.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add as well, where we've been talking about, you're kind of holding your breath for draft capital. Like, man, I would be shocked if he's outside of the second round. Like, he is. I think that there's something as well with these scouts where, like, Michigan won the championship. I think that they're going to sell themselves on him, like, playing winning football and blocking and doing the right things. And he crushes the combine. To me, like, you're almost getting, like, some extra, I don't know if you want to call it, like, value or EV, because, like, this might look dumb. The draft could come and he could be a day 3 pick, but, like, of the guys that are outside of the, like the 80 Mitchell, Xavier Worthy range, like, to me, he's the biggest lock to get the capital we're looking for, which when we're drafting early, whether that's in Dynasty or redraft, like, that's a big deal, because the floor on a lot of these guys, like, Javon Baker and Devontez Walker, they go day 4. And it's like, I'm trying to think of who that was in the past where you draft a guy and it's like, God, like, his draft capital just, like, went completely down the shitter.
Seth
like,
Williams was one of them for me. I was like, Seth Williams is pretty interesting.
God, I love that profile too, man. Seth Williams will get me every time.
It looks great until he doesn't get drafted at all. Like, what I think he might have been 6th or 7th round pick, but that's a real problem. It's a real problem. And we've had some big hits. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua coming out of day 3, but we shouldn't expect those. We should expect most of our hits to come day 2. We should, if a guy falls to day 3, that's a real meaningful dent in his outlook.
I'd say Akeem Butler as well was another one.
Oh, that's a good one.
But I will say the last thing I wanted to add on Roman Wilson, his per route stuff's a little bit better than Ricky Pearsall, which I like it better. Yards per route run 2.33, first down per route run above 0.1, which is really good. Like, it's solid in the class. And I do wonder as well, like, Michigan almost runs offense like my high school ran like the veer. You don't pass the ball unless it's like 3rd and long, right? Like, Michigan, I think, was kind of the same, where there were a lot of times where, like, it'd be like 3rd and 15 or 3rd and 12, and that's when they're breaking out the Roman Wilson play, and he's catching something downfield. He had like a tipped ball in the Alabama game that he caught. JJ McCarthy, like, everyone's showing this clip where he like rolls out on a flea flicker and hits Roman Wilson downfield. It was just kind of like when they needed a big play, they went to him. I do wonder how much of that ADOT is based off of almost like the game situation versus what his skill set is. So that's kind of what I'll add on the Jalen, because I was going to ask you about the Jalen Hyatt thing, but it's a little bit like, I don't think the Michigan offense was as gimmicky. Definitely had like a lot of like motion and stuff, but the Jalen, I think Hayden Winks highlighted it, but like with Jalen Wright on that Tennessee offense, like I think he ran against light boxes more than anything, like more than like base sets or anything, just because of like how spread out the whole thing was. Now, I want to give my
just real quick on Roman Wilson compared to Pearsall, because I still do have him ahead. One of the big reasons is that efficiency that you mentioned. He was efficient as in his second year, 2.3 yards per route run, efficient in his junior year, 2.14 yards per route run, and then 2.68 yards per route run. That ability to be efficient as an underclassman, I think, is pretty important. And we did get that with Wilson. So I'm still holding strong with him over Pearsall.
Yeah, that's where I'm going to be as well. We'll see where the draft capital goes. I mean, we talked about it earlier with Shipley, where if he goes day 3, then we know something's up. If he goes day 3, then or not day 3, but if he goes round 3, Roman Wilson, then we'll know, maybe he's not as good as we sort of expect him to be. But the last player, this one's super, super deep. I wouldn't recommend drafting him in best ball, but I really like Jaheim Bell. He is a tight end out of Florida State. I'll be honest, like, my model doesn't really like him. He's undersized, but I can't quit him. He's someone that I got put onto by the Devy community, like, early in his career. He had a year 2 breakout at South Carolina.
I was waiting for one good thing. There we go. Year 2
breakout. 500 yards from scrimmage. Oh, don't you worry. I got some stats here. 500 yards from scrimmage, 5 touchdowns in his second year. And this is what I love. Now, it's not super efficient, him running the ball, but I like we talked about with Ricky Pearsall, I like the dynamic players. He had 84 rush attempts, 303 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. Not a great yards per carry, but he is a tight end. I just like the idea that he was taking those. And he reminds me a lot of Jonnu Smith, where he's like that Jonnu Smith, like Dustin Keller type of archetype of like, as a Jets fan, I have to shout out Dustin Keller.
Yeah, good name.
6'2", 240 pounds, like very undersized, 4'6", 40, explosive with a 38-inch vertical. And I have a bunch of graphics I'll put up on the screen here when I go back and edit this. But when you look at the class, this is a tweet from Scott Barrett. When you look at this tight end class by career yards per route run, Jaheim Bell, 2.31, second in the class behind just Brock Bowers. If you look at missed tackles forced per reception, yards to catch, he is in a league of his own. Y-axis is missed tackles forced per reception. Yak per reception is X-axis. He's in the top right looking like Devin Achane in these charts. And then you also have, his yards per route run in the slot versus his overall yards per route run. So he's getting production out of the slot. He's getting production. He also has really good yards per route run versus zone. He's someone you can use in the rushing game. He's someone you can get involved everywhere. And on top of that, he has those great yards per route run numbers despite, on a Florida State team competing with Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson and Trey Benson. And then even, I don't know, I was going to say it's freshman year at South Carolina. Maybe we're talking Brian Edwards area, but I'm really not sure. But yeah, Jaheim Bell is someone that I'm going to keep an eye on. If he can go just give me 4th round draft capital. He's someone that I really like if he can get to a spot that needs a tight end, kind of like a Chigo Okonkwo, where I think that he could be someone that's very efficient on a per route basis. I know he hasn't really panned out, but he did give you a value gain in Dynasty pretty much right away.
Yeah, for sure he did. It's interesting you mentioned Achane, because my concern with Bell is that he's going to be in the backfield. He's kind of like an H-back. Is he played as a tight end? And if he is, I find him very intriguing as well. He was one of the first guys. I actually took a bunch of him in probably through my first 12 drafts. I probably had 4 shares of Jaheim Bell, just taking him a bunch. But then I started to dig more in and I just got a little bit nervous about his deployment at the NFL level, where if he's maybe too far over in that Jonnu Smith archetype, where he's actually just kind of an H-back and not
like Jalen Samuels.
Yeah, like Jalen Samuels, exactly. Although I guess at some points, Jalen Samuels with tight end eligibility would have been kind of nice. But maybe he's listed as a running back, in fantasy. So that's just the concern for me. But I would love it. I would love it if he's just kind of put out there as a kind of a move tight end and gets good draft capital. That wouldn't be really fun. Ben Sinnott, I wanted to mention, is kind of a later guy. He's my guy at tight end who give me day 2 draft capital, man. He's really, really fun with day 2 draft capital. One of the things that I found to be a funny edge, it shouldn't be an edge, but it is if you just look at the RAS scores for tight end and you go down 2 names, don't get whoever has the top, don't draft that guy. Everyone's drafting that guy. Go down 2 names and that guy, and then check to see if he was productive. And oh, he was. Cool. Ben Sinnott has a 9.73 RAS. He had a 6.823 cone, which is really good when you're weighed 250 pounds. He's 6'4", 250. Also had a pretty nice short shuttle. Agility generally pretty important for tight ends. Rotoviz did some research on that back in the day as an important factor to consider for these tight ends. And he also has he's got everything. He's got a 40-inch vertical. He's got 126-inch broad jump. 4.68 40 is pretty good, again, at 250. So the athleticism is there. He's not the most athletic tight end in the class, but I don't need the guy to be the very, very best just to be really athletic. He also was efficient last year with 2.02 yards per route run. That's a pretty good mark for a tight end. And he's a decent enough run blocker. He's not amazing as a run blocker, but this is a traditional kind of inline tight end who, is then going to get used in the passing game, which I actually like that because I don't need a creative offensive coordinator to be thinking outside the box. Most of these guys are just thinking inside the box. They have ideas about the way these players should be deployed. And Ben Sinnott's going to fit, very much in kind of the classic tight end archetype. He can just kind of go out and win. a traditional tight end job and be very effective there. He was also, decently productive, not amazing production, but 676 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns in his final season. That was good for a 25% dominator rating. So he flashed a little bit as an actual producer, flashed that efficiency. He's got the athleticism. I would really like draft capital. I would really like him to go third round would be fine. But if he goes third round, given what Jatavian Sanders did at his pro day, I think Sinnott could be the tight end 2 in this class if he gets draft capital. I'm pretty excited. I mean, it's a very weak tight end class behind Brock Bowers, so it's a low bar. But yeah, that's my guy in day 3 that I'm hoping goes to day 2.
I don't hate that take at all. I like Ben Sinnott as well. If you look at missed tackles forced, you have Brock Bowers with 18 this past year. You have Jaheim Bell at 12, and you have Ben Sinnott at 14. Like the only guys that are over like 10 in this class or over like 12 in this class. He's shifty. He produced early enough for a tight end that we really care about. And I will say as well, the NFL Next Gen Stats prospect model is like pretty cool. And it's Bowers, it's JT Sanders, and it's Ben Sinnott, the only guys with an 80 plus on NFL Next Gen Stats. So I'm right there with you. I do like him as well. Just comes down to draft capital, which it's a little spicy, but I do kind of like that. I mean, JT Sanders is almost it wasn't quite Watermeyer, but it was not great in terms of what he did at the combine. Like he went from somebody that I was like, maybe he could be in that same tier with like your your Keon Coleman's like early seconds, but like now, I'm not taking him at all. Yeah, I'm not taking him at all really in the. Maybe like sometimes if I'm down bad at tight end in the big board, sure. But he's like a 3rd round rookie pick to me now, so I don't mind the idea of somebody else sort of taking that throne from him.
Yeah, 100%. And I would also say with Sinnott, like he's interesting enough that I'm going to be taking him in rookie drafts even as a day 3 pick. Because he's going to cost very little. No one's really talking about him. And I think he's got a profile that deserves, to be in the mix in that like round 3, round 4, like super athletic with some production and efficiency. That's the kind of guy we want to take swings on, especially because he can, it might take him 2 or 3 years, but he could win like a starting NFL job at tight end.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me either. I mean, we've seen, last year, like Brenton Strange and the other guy from Schoonmaker both went like second round or whatever. It wouldn't shock me. We see tight ends go in weird places all the time. But that's all I have. I feel like, I don't know. I think I wrote down that we're going to talk through 6 players. We talked through way more than that. I do appreciate your time, Pat. I know you have a lot going on. I told you I wanted to squeeze you in right before you go for your induction into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it was supposed to be this afternoon, but we pushed it back till tomorrow. No,
yeah, you moved your schedule around for me here. But yeah, shout out to the people, what you have going on here and what they can kind of look forward to this draft season.
Yeah, so this morning I had an article go out on the tier 5 of the wide receivers, but I have each of the top wide receivers in their own tier. So this is kind of the A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, Keon Coleman, Laube McConkey, not in that order, by the way. All of those guys kind of diving into their profiles in depth. You can check that out at legendaryupside.com. I've also got best ball rankings that are updating daily, even though I'll be out over the next couple of weeks, still updating those. I've got a team that's helped me out with that. And Dynasty rankings updated today, and those will be continually updated every Monday as well. So yeah, go ahead and head over to the site and doing rookie deep dive profiles on. I've got part 1 of the running backs already out. Part 2 is coming out very soon. Part 3 of wide receivers is going to come out, covering some of those deeper names that we talked about. Going to have a tight end article coming out. Already covered all the quarterback stuff, all those Bo Nix stats in there. So yeah, lots of good stuff over at the site.
Yep, definitely worth checking out, legendaryupside.com. You got a bunch of good writers. What else you got?
I just want to say, I've been forgetting to mention this. If you sign up for a yearly subscription, we do have, there's not that many left, but we have some $50 underdog credits. If you sign up for a yearly subscription, you got to fill out this form on the site. It's right up at the top of the site, perks/Discord. Fill out the form. You could also just email me at legendaryupside@gmail.com if you'd rather do that. And let me know you signed up and you want the credit. Not too many left, but still some of those $50 credits for yearly subscribers while supplies last.
Yep. And you built the site yourself, right?
I did, yeah. I built it.
That's great. You got the I was looking. You got the nighttime mode on. You can go dark or light. That's more advanced than I got.
No, I did. I used a template. I didn't design it from scratch. But yeah, I did build it myself.
That's great. Definitely, of course, if you're watching this, check it out. Pat's great. Dynasty, best ball, everything he's got going on over there. If you're watching, make sure you subscribe, leave a like. We got a ton of stuff this Dynasty offseason. We'll have more guests, more rookie talk, all of that good stuff. As always, if you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold.